Fasten your seatbelts for the realest Eagles and Sixers YouTuber! One who plays no clickbait and gets to the point! The myth, the legend, Nicky Steves! Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keeps things real. I'm simply statue, think, and slate, dropping unrealistic man. 2K takes for the clip. Even though cats like that get views closer to the milli, never hear me preach, slip on to Philly. Before you watch the Eagles all the way through to early 22, authentic talk, forget what others do. Come to my channel, you know the deal. Yo, boy, always keep things real. The 24/7, 365 way. Sports content for the reals that fill the day.
Good afternoon, folks. It is now episode 49, folks. We are one away from episode 50 of the 3-Point Blitz. It's been about a year since we started this bad boy. We did this about a year ago. We started episode 1. Now we're just one away from episode 50. And it's the first episode of March, so that means March Madness and NFL free agency are right around the corner, and the NBA season is going to be heating up. So without any further ado, we'll kick this thing off like we usually do with the rant of the week. And I was thinking about it. I didn't really find any like major direct events to rant about, but there was something that I saw, actually two things I saw that made me want to talk about this subject right here. Financially irresponsible athletes. Now, I've seen two news stories come up recently that inspired me to talk about this. The most recent one I saw was about how OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., is officially filing for bankruptcy, folks. Yes, that is real. OBJ has filed for bankruptcy. Chad and Blazed, what is up? Thanks for stopping by. It looks like we got the Pittsburgh Steelers fans crew in the start so far. Good news is the two people that inspired this rant of the week are not Pittsburgh Steeler alumni. One of them's a football player, Odell Beckham Jr., and the other is former boxer turned promoter Oscar De La Hoya, who's over $20 million in debt. Mind you, this guy is now a promoter, the CEO of a privately owned company, and that's the most negligent case of financial, what's the word? It's the most negligent case of handling finance, because you're talking about a guy in Oscar De La Hoya who's made how many millions of dollars between his boxing earnings and the revenue he gets as the CEO of Golden Boy Promotions? And this guy's over $20 million in debt with his business handlings? I mean, first off, with him, he's lucky it's a privately owned company, because if this was a publicly traded company, he'd have been out on his arse a while ago. He would have had a lot of pressure on him from his stockholders if it were a public company. But the point is, you see, there's two of many examples of athletes in different sports, team or individual, who are reckless with their money. And we see this. Now, the one parallel with all the two examples I just named that were recently cited in the news, plenty of other examples from the Mike Tysons, Chad Ochocinco's, Le'Veon Bell's, and not just athletes, but you can include musicians, celebrities, so on and so forth who do this. And Blaze says it's crazy to me how there are athletes make millions and squander by spending like little kids. It's a shame, because millions of people would love to have that type of cash. Absolutely. Absolutely. You get so many people. Now, you see a guy like OBJ, for example, Wing Pro, his main issue, he went from over $40 million to bankrupt due to a combination of fancy expenses, housing, boats, cars, lavish partying lifestyle. Not to mention as well, let's also factor in medical bills, including surgeries for all, medical expenses for surgery, doctor's appointments. And then on top of that, you got all the legal issues he's had, having to pay lawyers to help him out. I mean, that's why you got to be financially smarter. Now, the injuries, you don't have full control over the injuries, like in the case of OBJ, because in OBJ's case, hey, injuries can happen anytime. Now, sometimes it could be taking care of your body, but sometimes it could be luck too. Now, we know it's cool to say, oh, there's no such thing as luck, but reality is sometimes certain athletes are blessed to be more durable than others. Like you take a look at a guy like Jerry Rice. He was blessed with durability to play 2+ decades in the National Football League, whereas a guy like OBJ, he wasn't blessed with the same durability, and he didn't have as long a career. So there's that factor right there. Where OBJ unfortunately had all these type of injuries, and that tied into medical expenses. But then on top of it, you had the lavish lifestyle. That's why they tell people, whether it be him or in the case of Oscar De La Hoya, who's had spent a ton of money on fancy suits, vacations, money on partying, most notably being an alcoholic. All these different guys have these vices. Like Le'Veon Bell, his biggest vice was just being greedy. He wanted more money, and ultimately that cost him in the long term. What's interesting to know about Le'Veon Bell, later in the show, we're going to talk about some of the best and worst NFL free agent signings of all time. That will come up a little bit later on in the show. But a guy like Le'Veon, he let his own greed get the better of him. He wasn't happy with what he had. He had a big contract with the Steelers, more than most would make in their lifetime. He had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. He was on pace to be one of the best running backs. And he also had fancy car, a nice boat, a love for partying. And ultimately, it all started to catch up to him. That and his on-the-field performance diminishing when he started with the Jets in 2019. He started that slow decline, fall from grace. And that meant the money started slowing up. The contracts weren't as big as they were before. The paychecks weren't as big as they were in Pittsburgh. So ultimately, his desire for more cost him in the long term. But then you still got a guy living that lavish lifestyle while the money's slowing up. Eventually, that'll catch up to you. And that's what happened with OBJ, too. The money started slowing up. You know, the injuries, the medical bills, you know. After the run with the Rams, when he got hurt in the Super Bowl, his stock diminished. He became a one-year deal pass-around guy, which meant the contracts were slowing down. And trust me, on anybody, regardless of how much money you make, the one thing you'll all have in common is when you see, if you've ever at any point seen how much money you're saving, you look at it and you're like, hey, look, man, I'm making some money. I got some money in the bank account. You feel a high from it, but trust me, as soon as you got to pay something, whether it be a big medical bill, pay off a debt, and the money starts to slow down, that high starts to come down with it. But that's why they tell you live beneath your means, meaning don't, make your financial life lower than what you're worth. So that way you can save more money in the long term. Because in the long term, you're better off, no matter who you are or how much money you make, spending less than what your lifestyle can afford. Because, sure, from time to time, you might go have that fancy party. But over time, that catches up to you. And a guy like Vince Young is named to blowing his money in a bad way. I remember Vince Young, too. There's another great example, normal guy. Because here was a guy who got that initial contract from his college likeness when he got drafted by the Tennessee Titans. But by 2010, he peaked in that 2009 season. So his fourth year in the NFL, he peaked. And then after that, he went from 1 year backup term with the Eagles to trying to make the Bills roster. I think it was the Bills that he tried out for. But then I know he also tried out for the Packers. He didn't make the roster in that case. So really his last year under NFL contract was 2011 as the Eagles back up to Michael Vick. So the money was slowing down at that point, and he had spent all that money trying to live a fun life, and ultimately it came back to bite him. And we got Jay plays, what's wrong with pro strip clubs? Where else are they going to go? Home like they're supposed to be. Look, as far as that goes, I understand why some people don't like the idea of it. It's a little odd for a large corporation that's supposed to push itself on being professional to promote an adult nightclub, let's just say. Yeah, that's a little bit odd. But at the same time, when it comes to the promotion, let's be honest, this is the same NBA that gives players involved in domestic abuse cases that have had lawsuits against them for sexual harassment or some form of lawsuit. They promote these guys. Some of their retired players, their all-time greats, have had their issues, like Karl Malone. Enough said about the issue itself, but he's still promoted from time to time by the NBA, even in the years after his retirement. Hey, what is up, Mitch? Thanks for stopping by. Mitch just got done his show in the morning. He was talking about the NBA, previewing the Sixers matchup against the Spurs a little bit. So shout out to Mitch on killing it on his Tuesday morning show. And thanks for promoting the 3-point blitz. I owe you one. And speaking of promotions, while we're still on that, later tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Everything on the Table, episode 4 is going down with your boy and Agent Warrior X on the network and our respective channels. So we'll share that later. Stay tuned for that. And back to what I was saying, there's many different examples of negligence and of being financially irresponsible. You could say Allen Iverson. His hitting up the casinos, going to the nightclubs, it caught up to him. And another problem that comes with that too, and why these guys spend so irresponsibly is now all of a sudden they got these homies surrounding them. Sometimes it could be people they knew when they were young. It could be people that just know them because they're famous. You get these groupies surrounding you. They want to hang out with you. They want to have a good time. They know you're going to be covering the tab for them when they go out. So they let, like say in Allen Iverson's case, his groupies let him pay for the tab. And he just, I get it. Some of them may have been people he grew up with that he still wanted to hang around. But you got to realize something. A lot of athletes don't realize till it's too late that a lot of those guys they grew up with that are hanging out with them, hey, they just get seen it as an opportunity to low-key live the baller lifestyle without the financial funds of it through somebody else. And that's what happens too sometimes, why these guys go out to the clubs and they pay these ridiculous amounts of money. Because sure, maybe tonight they have the money to fund the night out, but if you keep doing this repeatedly, eventually that money's going to slow up and you're going to be in big trouble. Now, in the case of someone like an Oscar De La Hoya, CEO, former athlete turned CEO, who's got millions of dollars from his career in the boxing world to now being a business owner, making millions with his company, making millions with him as a CEO, you're over 20 million in debt on a property. What are you spending that money on? I mean, especially for that type of guy who's now a CEO who still has money coming in from his profits off his business. What are you spending it on? I mean, I know he's had his alcoholisms before he's been to rehab, so I know some of that money comes from partying, but what else is he spending that money on? Seriously. Like, is he paying for all of his own expenses, for all of his flights, all of his food, buying all of his food? And paying, like, what is he paying for his fighter's ring gear or something? Like, how do you end up that much in debt? And that's crazy right there. I don't care what if you're a business owner with millions of dollars and you're over 20 million in debt on a property, you need to step down, seriously. Now, in his case, that could cost him in the long term, could cost him endorsement deals, because there might be some young up-and-coming boxers that are a trainer or someone in their ear might say, hey, stay away from De La Hoya. He's financially irresponsible. So that could cost him his business, could cost him some opportunities for revenue in the long term. Once it gets out that you're financially irresponsible, or whether it's another example would be, say, if an NFL agent had this problem too. Certain people for a player might convince him, hey, stay away from this guy. Stay away from this guy. Now, like if say with Woj, let's just say Woj were to be millions in debt. I'm not saying he is, but let's just say as an example. For if a player is looking for publicity and Woj is one of the go-to guys, but all of a sudden it's coming out that Woj is irresponsible with his money, some of the player's teammates and those close to them are going to say, hey, don't do business with Woj. He's financially irresponsible. There might be some trouble there. So from that standpoint of being either an agent, a promoter, an owner, whatever the case may be, and you're in debt by millions, despite making millions, if not billions of dollars yearly on your business, that can cost you clientele in the long term. I mean, there's so many different ways you can be irresponsible, but I'm telling you, whatever it is, you have to be financially responsible. Now, I know for guys like OBJ, Allen Iverson, and so many others that have gone broke in the short term, those boat parties, those nights out at the club, those big houses may have seemed great at the time. I understand it's like, hey, get yourself that nice mansion while you have the chance to. But in the long term, if you have a serious injury and the money starts slowing up, the contracts get thinner. Over time, you're not going to be able to afford that lifestyle anymore. So you got to be smarter with your money. Bottom line, that's unfortunately the mistake a lot of these guys that have been in the news lately, either going bankrupt or being in debt with their company or on a property for their business or whatever the case may be. They in trouble, man, or they owe the IRS tons of money. In the long term, it all comes back to bite them. I mean, there's a million different examples you can think of players that once had the world in their pockets that are broke. Vin Baker, remember him? I mean, just one example. Chad Ochocinco lost money over time. I mean, I could go on and on. You could look at probably hockey and soccer players that are broke now too, that by normal standards made a lot of money. Maybe not as much money as, say, a LeBron James or a Tom Brady, but they still probably made a lot of money and lost it. So telling you, these guys, don't look to these guys and their partying lifestyle for inspiration, man, because you've seen a lot of these guys that were living the good life in the short term, or what appeared to be, end up in some serious long-term financial trouble, and they take a huge fall from grace. So the lesson is, be more responsible with your money, especially if you're not an athlete, you don't have millions to bank off of. Be smarter. So that's my rant of the week. Now I'm just going to touch up on something real briefly. This thing, I call it discussion bait. You guys probably know what I'm talking about. When we saw it around a week ago, BetMGM did a list predicting the top 10 best players in the NBA a decade from now. They predicted that Wemby would be the best in about 5 years from now, excuse me. All right, fair enough. I could see 5 years from now Wemby being the best player. Jokic and Giannis were not on that predicted list, which I could understand. They might either be just about to retire or right at the end of their peak, and someone else might step up in that top 10 list, like a Tyrese Maxey might step in there. I get that. But some of them were a bit odd. You had Anthony Edwards as a top 5 player, which you could argue he is right now. But then they're saying that he might end up on the Bulls. I'm like, hey, on the Bulls? Unless the Bulls get a lottery pick and they hit on someone that could be a future star and AE wants to join up with them, then maybe 5 years from now it could happen. But who knows? He could either still be on the T-Wolves or could be somewhere entirely different that nobody's predicting right now. And they also predicted that Tyrese Maxey would be on the Miami Heat 5 years from now, which that seems a bit random. Or they predicted Jared McCain would return to Philly and be a top 10 player. This list even had Chet Holmgren over SGA in 5 years. I'm like, wait a minute. To me, that's discussion bait right there. And by that I mean some of these lists like BetMGM, they put out ludicrous lists and give some controversial takes to get people talking. But in some ways, it's actually genius if you're looking to get some publicity and get a conversation going. So I say that sometimes, and let's be real, as fans, sometimes we get played by this discussion bait the more I think about it. And because, you think that, you might see it and be like, what? You got this person as a better player than so-and-so? You really think this person's going to be better? Are you crazy? And sometimes people do that on purpose because they know it's going to be unpopular. It's what I call genius discussion bait. Try to bait people into replying to an unpopular stance or an unlikely scenario just to get a reaction out of them and to get the comment section moving and to get people talking. And that sometimes we fall victim to that. And Jay's back on the financial side. I could have Bezos money and I still wouldn't have a mansion. How many bathrooms do I really need? Yeah, exactly. It's that obsession over materialism is what it is. Too many people fall victim to that trap, man. But as I was saying about the discussion bait, the more I think about it, now that I'm saying it, I ask myself, why do we even talk about this? Why even reply to these discussions where they're give intentionally unpopular, idiotic takes? When I think about it, I should withdraw myself. And quite frankly, it's kind of genius. I feel like Cam Newton's another one who does it too. Some of the comments he'll make on his podcast are done just to get people talking. I think same with probably Agent Zero, Gilbert Arenas. Now, some of the stuff he says he probably believes, but some of the stuff he says he probably just spews to get a reaction out of people. And let's see, probably Chris Sims as a football analyst. He knows people don't take him seriously, so he just says something stupid to get people talking about him. So we just got to remember there's a lot of discussion bait out there, and it's not worth necessarily feeding into. But what is worth discussing is where the NBA stands right now, taking a look at the teams. I'm going to give you my take on who I thought were the best teams of the week from last week. And then we're going to kick this thing off. Let's talk about NBA Eastern and Western Conference teams of the week. And this is going to be from last week, going from February 22nd on Sunday to February 28th, which was Saturday. So I'm going from that whole stretch from last Sunday to the Saturday that just passed by. For my teams of the week, Western Conference, I'm going to go with the San Antonio Spurs because they had a dominant win streak going, and they included a win over the Detroit Pistons, who had a really good week outside that one game. And it's the same Spurs team who we got to play tonight. I don't know. I'm not really looking forward to that one as a Sixers fan. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope they prove me wrong, but I'm not looking forward to that. But last week, the Spurs, they kicked off the week on last Monday, with the snowstorm with the 114-103 victory over the Detroit Pistons, the number 1 seed in the East. A 3-point win over the Toronto Raptors, who are a good team themselves. And then they closed it out by beating the Brooklyn Nets, who was the easiest team on their schedule. But still, I give the Spurs the nod for those 3 wins, because 2 of those 3 were against 2 of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. So I give the Spurs the nod for team of the week because they won 2 tough games. Cam Newton needs hat money. Spurs were undefeated in the month of February. Exactly. And that's another reason I consider it. They continued that winning streak with the Detroit Pistons wins and the Toronto Raptors win, and then the easy one against the Nets as far as that 7-day stretch goes. But so I got them as not just the team of the Western Conference team of the week, but the Western Conference team of February by a mile. And they're not too far back from the OKC Thunder, so watch out. Now, as far as the Eastern Conference team of the week from last week on Sunday the 22nd to Saturday the 28th, you know who it is? I'm going to go with the Detroit Pistons. Because, yes, they did end up having the loss to the Spurs, but they followed that up with a win over the OKC Thunder on last week on Wednesday, the 25th. And then on Friday, an OT win over the Cavs. So, and even that Spurs game, yes, they fell short, but they played one of the top teams and gave a valiant effort, then bounced back, defeating both the Thunder and the Cavs. And then, yes, I know the Hornets were undefeated during that stretch, but to be fair, the Charlotte Hornets had an easy schedule. I consider the Pistons, because they went 2-1 against 3 tough teams, and they showed they belong at the top of the Eastern Conference. So I'll give the Detroit Pistons the nod as team of the week. Pistons have to show they aren't just regular season. And yep, and that's where the big test is going to come into play come playoff time. Because this will be the first time since really 2008 that the Pistons went into a playoff series with actual expectations. All the times they've been to the playoffs since that 08 run to the conference finals, where they fell short against the eventual champs Boston Celtics, they were just lucky to even be in the playoffs. 09, one and done. 2016, one and done. One and done 2019. All 3 of those times being sweeps. And then last year, they went into a Knicks series with no expectations, lost but took them to 6 games and kept the series competitive. So last year, with no pressure, with expectations of losing, despite losing, they did so with pride and honor. Now, this year, they're actually going to go into the playoffs with expectations. Now, which they continue the momentum. They've got the number 1 seed. Okay, first round should be, whether it be against the Hornets, if they get the 8th seed, or who else is in that play-in mix in the East? Hold on. It could be the Hornets, possibly, because they're now at 500, and they've worked their way into the play-in spot, so they could get the 8th seed. It could be if the Sixers lose more games and fall out from being the 6th seed, they could be a play-in team. They could have the 7th or 8th seed. It could be the Orlando Magic or the Miami Heat that the Pistons end up playing in the opening round. So I do think that opening round Pistons should win that series. But then from there, that's where it's going to get tougher. But to be fair to the point of this subject, yeah, I got them as the teams of the week. Now, with that being said, this ties into the NBA players of the week. And the reason why we start off there is because the Eastern Conference player of the week was actually Jalen Duren, who had himself a really good weekend for the Detroit Pistons. It was him and Anthony Edwards. Now, let's take a look real quick. I'm going to share a graphic with you guys. You guys can see it for yourselves. So here we go. I'm going to share the screen with you guys. You can see for yourself. You got Jalen Duren had 25.8 points per game, 13 about 14 rebounds. We'll say 26 points and 14 rebounds on average for the week. And played a key role in the Detroit Pistons' excellent week. So I'm going to give him credit right there and say, yeah, he was a key contributor, especially being that the Pistons won tough games, though, too. Yes, you had the Hornets go undefeated through the week, but let's be real. Who did they play? The Pacers, the Bulls, and Wizards? Yeah, I'm not that impressed by the Hornets. And then you on the other side, it's Anthony Edwards, who individually had himself an excellent week with 28 points, about 29 points per game, 3 rebounds per game, 5 assists per game. He was really a key factor in them having a really good week. Now, for the San Antonio Spurs, you could argue that somebody, maybe like a Wemby or someone could stand out. Not could stand out too as a potential player of the week candidate, but I guess they went with Anthony Edwards because he had to carry more of the weight of the team, so he gets. But also Wemby, remember, missed a game against the Nets too, so he didn't play that game. Whereas, let's see, what about the Raptors and Spurs? I'm looking this up real quick. Wemby, he only had 12 points against the Raptors. He wasn't. Devin Vessel was the leader. De'Aaron Fox was kind of the lead guy. So, throughout the week, the Spurs as a team more so dominated. There wasn't one specific player who stood out. It was mainly Anthony Edwards in the Western Conference. So I see where he comes as the player of the week because it's based off individualism. So that's that for now. We will come back to the NBA before the end of the show. I'll give a quick predictions for tonight's games, but we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about the NFL. So I'm just going to take a few minutes. I got to go put my laundry in the dryer. So I'll take a quick stop, be right back. We'll talk about NFL free agency, including going to go down memory lane, talk about some of the best and worst NFL free agent signings since 1993. So if you're a fan of retro sports talk, stay tuned. We're going to talk a little bit about NFL free agency blast from the past coming soon. So stay tuned. All right, folks. Thanks for being patient during the quick break. Now we're back. And being that it is March, it is March Madness, but also NFL free agency. And we know throughout the years, there have been some really good and some terrible NFL free agent signings throughout the years. So, with that being said, what I'm going to do right now is we're going to go through going from 1993 to present. We're going to list go down memory lane, look back on some of the best and worst free agent signings that have occurred throughout the league since then. So I'm going to do kind of what I do, usually get the bad out the way, then get to the good. So we'll get some of the worst free agent signings out of the way. We'll talk about them first. And for this one, free agent signings are guys that were signed during free agency. It's not, so trades aren't going to count. So like Randy Moss to the Raiders won't be on there because that was a trade, not a free agent signing. Same with Antonio Brown to the Raiders. He was not a free agent signing. He was traded from Pittsburgh to the Raiders. So this is specifically free agent signings. Guys that were signed in free agency. So let's get started with this. So I'm just going to come up with, let's start this off. Some of the more recent, some other ones that come to mind, you got, some of you guys might remember Elvis Grbac. Was he a free, let me remember, was Elvis Grbac a free agent signing for the Ravens, I think, in 2002 and one, I think, right after they cut Trent Dilfer? So, yeah, you also had, so we're going to start off with Elvis Grbac, who was signed to a 5-year, $30 million contract for the Ravens. This was right after the Ravens won the Super Bowl. And then, because remember, the Ravens won Super Bowl 35. They destroyed the New York Giants. Remember, with that, Ray Lewis was the MVP. Trent Dilfer was the QB, but they won in spite of him. Now, they took Elvis Grbac, who had a pretty all right season the year beforehand, and it made sense at the time. Take a guy in Grbac who was considered an upgrade over Trent Dilfer, who the Ravens won a Super Bowl in spite, but Elvis Grbac struggled. It was almost like they kept Trent Dilfer in that spot where they pretty much made the playoffs because they still had that elite defense, but ultimately they didn't have the same luck running the table to a Super Bowl appearance like they had the previous year. So ultimately, yeah, and he was only lasted one season with the Ravens before he got released into a 5-year contract. And that's what also makes this really bad was he was fresh off a solid season. Was it with the 49ers in 2000 where they didn't play great as a team, but you figured at the time, okay, the Ravens were in a better team position. You figured it would be an upgrade. He's better than Dilfer. Why not bring him in? You'll have a shot at competing and winning a second Super Bowl. But that didn't happen. Grbac struggled. The Ravens admitted after one season they had the wrong guy. So ultimately, that's one example of a major flop. Another one was Jeff Garcia to the Browns a few years later in 2004. Now, Jeff Garcia had a solid run with the 49ers. He had 0-1 and 0-2. He led them to the playoffs. They won in 0-2 against the Giants in the wild card round, pulling off that miracle comeback. So Jeff Garcia had a respectable resume. Now you're talking about a Cleveland Browns team who they made the playoffs in 0-2, but lost to Pittsburgh. Then in 0-3, they took a step back, but you figured, okay, Jeff Garcia had led the 49ers to the playoffs back-to-back years. He'd be an upgrade over Tim Couch and Kelly Holcomb. And, well, it turns out a guy like Jeff Garcia, you need to put a competent offensive line and some good receivers around him for him to actually succeed. The Cleveland Browns didn't exactly have the best team situation, and it didn't give Jeff Garcia the real shot at success. They gave up on him after 1 year. The Browns were dreadful. They finished in last in the AFC North. And, yeah, that's pretty much one of the forgotten. That's the low life of Jeff Garcia's NFL career. That's because he was terrible in Cleveland. And he had to resurrect his career as a backup for the Eagles when he filled in for Donovan McNabb in 2006. And then he got a contract with the Bucks where he helped lead them to the playoffs. So Garcia was a respectable quarterback in his own right, but it actually makes it look worse for the Browns that you brought in a guy who actually was a solid quarterback, but couldn't get it done. In Cleveland, that was one example right there. No, here's the one right here. Scott Mitchell with the Detroit Lions in 1994. Now, they took over for a Lions team. Everyone is terrible in Cleveland. I love it. Yep, and speaking of terrible, and speaking of players that went to teams that were terrible, remember Scott Mitchell for the Detroit Lions? Whoo! He came in 1994 time with the Lions, who had prime Barry Sanders, a solid receiver in Herman Moore, who was pretty underrated for a bit in the 90s. And then ultimately, you're talking about, the problem was Scott Mitchell was the weak link on that Lions offense for a team that was in a loaded NFC at the time with the Packers, Cowboys, 49ers. Even teams like the Eagles were still solid. And the Minnesota Vikings were still a formidable team in the NFC. And here came Scott Mitchell for the Detroit Lions, the weak link on that team, ultimately played a role in hurting any chance they really had at being contenders, most notably the 95 season when they played the Eagles at Veterans Stadium. Remember one of the players guaranteed a win? And then Scott Mitchell went out there, threw 4 picks against the Eagles in that ugly loss where their defense got destroyed, gave up over 50 points. That right there, folks. So that's one of the reasons I consider a terrible free agent signing. He was ultimately the weak link on a Detroit Lions offense that had a chance with a real quarterback of ultimately making a run, but it didn't happen. I mean, you look at that prime Barry Sanders, an underrated Herman Moore, you had on at least 2 solid pieces to compete. I'm not saying the Lions were necessarily going to be a Super Bowl team because you still had teams like the Cowboys, the Packers with Reggie White, Brett Favre, Sterling Sharp and company. You still had the Vikings. So you still had 2 teams in their own division that were formidable foes. You had the 49ers with Steve Young were still in the mix. But anybody better than Scott Mitchell, the Lions at least have a chance of at least being in contention during that stretch. Maybe even if they had a better QB, maybe Barry would have stayed a few more years. But we'll never know for sure. So that's why I consider it a horrible sign, because he was considered the weak link that held them back. Remember Amon Green? Speaking of NFC North, remember he was with the Packers. He was one of the better running backs in the NFL. And he went to the Houston Texans. At the time, this seemed like it was going to be a good addition. And Amon Green was terrible. He even got replaced by Ron Dane. Yes, that Ron Dane, a former Heisman Trophy winner or finalist who was a bust for the Giants, now all of a sudden was a more lucrative option than Amon Green. Dude, Amon Green was pretty much ran into the ground in Green Bay. The Texans tried to pick him up the scraps thinking they had something to work with. And it turns out he was the weak link of that late 2000s Texans offense over Matt Shaw. Matter of fact, the Texans running game didn't really pick up till they got Arian Foster a few years later. So, I mean, this is a guy who had, let's see, what was it? What do you have? He probably had no 100-yard rushing games in Houston. He was just, dude, it's a shame. He was absolutely awful. And certainly not the return off your investment you want. Matter of fact, he had one really big run, I think, with the Texans. What did he play? He played in 6 games, had 123 yards. Second year, 8 games, 32 yards, bro. Amon Green could not stay healthy, and he was atrocious. So there's another flop. Now, speaking of running backs who went from one good situation to bad, and I hinted at this earlier, Le'Veon Bell to the Jets. Remember that? I know Blaze remembers. Days of Our Steelers, 2018, the soap opera. Le'Veon sat out. because he was greedy and wanted more money. Let's face it, that's really what happened. He went to the Jets. In a season and a half with the Jets, he had 0 100-yard rushing games. 0. Oh my God. He went there. He had nothing. I mean, this was a guy who had 3 Pro Bowl nods with the Steelers and was actually a really good back, looking like one of the top backs in the league and a potential Hall of Famer if he kept himself in check. But he went to the Jets and he did nothing. He didn't deliver on any of the expectations. His first year with the Jets, he had 789 yards, which is a significant downgrade from 2 1,000-yard seasons with the Steelers. He had 74 yards on 19 carries with the Jets. In Kansas City, he then went there. He got cut through the 2020 season, went to Kansas City. He actually did okay in Kansas City, but his attitude got him in trouble there, but that's another story. But Le'Veon with the Jets, though, was the problem. I mean, dude, 0 100-yard games, no 1,000-yard seasons. He did not live up to the hype of being a top back like he did with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And another bad free agent signing, let's go with Miles Sanders. Remember, Miles Sanders, Eagles fans, had a Pro Bowl year in 2022. Miles Sanders made the Pro Bowl, was part of that run to Super Bowl 57. He got a big contract from the Carolina Panthers. They had just drafted Bryce Young. They were looking at the future was going to be bright for the Panthers. You had Bryce Young with the number 1 pick. You had Miles Sanders, the Pro Bowl back, their new acquisition. They got Adam Thielen from the Vikings. Things were looking up, and Miles Sanders ultimately amounted to nothing with the Panthers. No notable games, no award, weekly or yearly awards. Had a major injury to end his stint there. Now he's stuck on the Cowboys. It's a number 2 rack, and good luck for Miles Sanders trying to rejuvenate his career there. But there was another terrible free agent signing that did nothing to help during the first year during Bryce Young's development. So there's another big flop right there. Now here's another one. DeMarco Murray for the Philadelphia Eagles, fresh off a 1,000-yard campaign with the Cowboys. DeMarco Murray came to Philly, and there was just, and he was horrible with the Eagles. That one season he was there. He was supposed to be the successor to LaShawn McCoy, a younger guy that was a really good runner that would help the Eagles offense out and would have more longevity than LaShawn McCoy. But that ultimately did not happen. DeMarco Murray had one notable highlight during the season with the Eagles, and that was a long touchdown run in week 17 of that season. Outside of that, he did nothing, and then he ended up going to the Tennessee Titans for a few seasons after that, where he was a little bit better, but not by much. So there was a terrible one right there. Now, talking about the Raiders, I alluded to some bad wide receiver trades, but I didn't mention, I'm going to kind of cheat here and mention 2 really bad back-to-back year free agent signings. You had Larry Brown from the Cowboys secondary in 95, who won the MVP of Super Bowl 30. They bring him in. He didn't produce well with the Raiders. Then the following year, after Super Bowl 31, they bring in Super Bowl MVP winner, Desmond Howard. Desmond Howard didn't pan out that well in the silver and black either. And speaking of former Packers going to the silver and black, another bad one was Javon Walker. Remember when Javon Walker went from the Packers to the Raiders? He went from having Brett Favre, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, throwing him the ball, to Jamarcus Russell and who else again? Throwing him the ball with the Raiders, and he just fell off the face of the earth, and people forgot who Javon Walker was real quick. I'll tell you, man, the Raiders, you know what? The Raiders and just free agent signings as a whole, man, it's terrible. But speaking of former Super Bowl winning MVPs that got a new contract, remember when Nick Foles got that contract from the Jaguars? Oh, he won Super Bowl 52 MVP, stepped in late in the season, helped the Eagles go on a 3-game winning streak to make the playoffs in 2018. Nick Foles did help lead the game-winning touchdown drive in that double doink game against the Bears. And then the Jaguars offered him a big contract thinking he'd be their savior. They had that year with Blake Bortles. They went 10-6. They following year reversed their record 6-10. They tried to bring in Foles. And ultimately that set the Jaguars from maybe having a shot at getting back to 2017 form to going in complete tank mode. Because Nick Foles got that big contract, went down his first game, the broken collarbone, got rushed back, came back and got benched against the Buccaneers, pre-Tom Brady Buccaneers, mind you. And then the Jags realized they made a big mistake, and when the Bears were crazy enough to try to acquire Nick Foles, the Jags did not hesitate to accept the Bears' offer for a trade in that 2020 offseason. So, yeah, Nick Foles was clearly a terrible free agent sign who came in to try to help rejuvenate the Jaguars and help them to their first chip like he did the Eagles, and ultimately none of that happened. Not even close. Let's see. Who else were some other... So there was another terrible free agent signing right there. I'd say Trey Flowers to the Lions, who went from New England to Detroit 2019, did not produce at all up to the level he did. So there's another terrible one right there. Who else? Oh, yeah, you got that as well. And you got, who else? David Boston. Remember when David Boston went to, who did he go to again? The Chargers. Remember he was with the Cardinals? He was one of their better receivers. Then he went, oh, remember he was horrible and pretty much drove himself out of the league. And so who else? You got Albert Haynesworth with Washington. Remember that one? God damn. Albert Haynesworth's most Washington tenure cemented in one play. Monday Night Massacre. He tries to make a block. He gets pushed down to the ground, makes no effort to get back up. Well, Michael Vick is in the pocket. He's moving. He's looking. He's moving. Haynesworth's making zero effort to get up and even try to make a play. Vick throws a pass for an easy touchdown and continues to destroy Washington. Then you got also Kenny Golladay, was a recent one, 2021, got the 4-year deal with the Giants. He had 1,000 receiving yards both 2018 and 2019 with the Lions, but just had 43 receptions, 1 touchdown in 2 seasons, and was eventually released. Remember Brock Osweiler to the Texans? He was supposed to be their big savior. Only lasted 1 season. They gave up on him and traded up for Deshaun Watson despite making the playoffs the previous year. That's bad when you get a big contract and a team gives up on you in spite of winning their division in 1 season. I mean, that was really bad too. And there's some others I may have forgotten to mention. Some of you guys might mention Randy Gregory to the Broncos, AJ Feely to the Dolphins. And those were pretty bad too, but these are just some of the worst that come to mind. So now we're going to switch helms, go with some of the another bad one, Nnamdi Asomugha to the Eagles. He came off being an elite defensive back for the Raiders, one of the few good things about the late 2000s, early 2010 Raiders teams. And he was ultimately trashed on that Eagles dream team. And they forgot about him after 1 year. So that was the last one I wanted to bring up. But now enough with the bad. Let's reflect on some of the good free agent signings, because there have been a lot of good ones since 93. Some that were big-time game changers in a good way for teams. So let's talk about some of the good ones too. We'll start off with a few gems that some of y'all may have forgotten about that I don't think get enough credit. One would be Shannon Sharp to the Baltimore Ravens in 2000. Some of y'all, we remember Shay for his 2 Super Bowl wins in Denver, the back-to-back, for his contributions on that team with John Elway, Terrell Davis, Rod Smith, and those guys. But don't forget, Shay was also an integral part of the 2000 Ravens. Matter of fact, he was the best thing about that Ravens offense that year, where they had such a great defense. Their offense didn't really have to do anything special. Shannon Sharp still led the team with over 1,000 receiving yards. And most notably in that playoff run, the AFC Championship game on the road against the Raiders in Oakland, he had a long touchdown that ultimately ended up being the difference that helped give the Ravens the victory and helped them secure the Super Bowl 35 berth versus the Giants. So let's not forget, Shannon Sharpe had a huge impact. And let's not forget, too, the second year he was on the team was Todd Heap's rookie year. You guys remember Todd Heap, who was also one of the better tight ends of the 2000s. He spent his rookie year under the learning tool of Shannon Sharpe, and you can tell that paid off too. So even though Shannon Sharpe was only there 2 years, he did play a big role in the offense. He made the plays when they needed him to. Now, he didn't have the same impact as he did with the Broncos, but that's also because the Broncos had a more prolific offense, and you had John Elway, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, throwing him the ball. Whereas the Ravens, he had Tony Banks, Trent Dilfer, and Elvis Grbac throwing him the ball. But Shannon Sharpe still made an impact on that team, both in terms of helping their offense in the AFC Championship game to get to the Super Bowl and mentoring Todd Heap, who became one of the best tight ends of the 2000s. Another one right there, okay, Rod Woodson, he was actually on that Ravens team in 2000. Now, he wasn't the main piece, but he was a contributing factor, so I got to give that nods. That helped them out too. So there was another one that helped. I mean, honorable mention would be Nick Foles to the Eagles, because if they didn't sign him in 2017, and they had to go with Nate Sudfeld, who ended up being who was their third stringer. If he had to take over for Carson Wentz, they wouldn't have won Super Bowl 52 with Nate Sudfeld. No way. So I got to consider Nick Foles an honorable mention for best, because without him, the Eagles don't win that Super Bowl 52, and their franchise's history is altered as a result. So Nick Foles at least deserves a nod for that 2-year stretch during his second stint with the Eagles. Another one, Blaze, if you're still there, I know this one's going to hurt, but this really helped the Giants, Plexico Burress, because you got to think about this. Look at how much of an impact the Plexico made on that Giants offense from 2005 till the nightclub incident in 2008. He was a key factor in that 05 season when the Giants won the NFC East. He helped them out in that playoff run. And you look at what happened that 2008 season. Early on in the season, when the Giants were red hot with Plexico, matter of fact, some people might think that if Plexico didn't make that dumb move, he would have been an even bigger thorn in the Eagles' side, because what happened that year in the playoffs, the Eagles beat the Giants, and then the Eagles and Cardinals playing the NFC Championship. Now, if Burress doesn't inadvertently take himself out of the occasion, so to say, if he's still there, maybe the Giants end up winning that game, and then maybe it's Giants-Cardinals in the NFC Championship game. Now, some might say, well, Cardinals still would have won anyway. They beat the Eagles originally. But here's the thing. It would have been the Giants with Plexico Burress. And secondly, here's the big factor. The game would have been at Giants Stadium, not in Arizona. So the Cardinals would have had to travel in January to the Northeast where it's colder, which would have been more likely advantaged Giants in that game. So who knows? And then maybe 2009, 2010, instead of being in prison, he's still on the Giants. Who knows how much of a difference that makes? But this isn't to talk about the bad. This is to point out the difference with the Giants' production on offense with him versus when he was out of the occasion. He was a huge factor in that offense those first 3 seasons he was there. So I got to give Plexico Burress a nod as one of the best free agent signings. He really was one of the catalysts that helped that Giants offense out by the time they got to that 07 season, and ultimately caught the game-winning touchdown in Super Bowl 42. So I got to consider that one of the best free agent signings as well. Now, and then you get other ones that come to mind. Hold on one second. Of course, you go 2012, Denver Broncos signed Peyton Manning, 1 year removed from that 8-8 season, that upset win over the Steelers. Broncos knew they were kind of in win now mode. They knew Tebow probably had a limited ceiling, and they saw that Peyton Manning was available. They gave Peyton a tour of their facility. They knew they had a shot at getting him. They knew the tour went well, and ultimately Peyton Manning during that entire month where he basically toured the entire country, basically going to different teams, viewing their facility, and ultimately he chose the Denver Broncos, and ultimately it was best for both sides. Broncos were contenders into all 4 seasons he was there, 2 Super Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl win. Now, granted, the Super Bowl win, that was mainly the defense carrying them for the most part, but Peyton Manning did play a key contribution to them even being in position where they were contenders going into that season. And not to mention, they had a Super Bowl appearance in Super Bowl 48 a few years earlier where they made it that far. So ultimately, yeah, Peyton Manning easily, that was arguably the best short-term free agent signing of the past 15 years in the NFL. The best short-term free agent signing. Even better than Brady to the Bucs. Even better. Because Peyton, you had 4 seasons where they were in contention. Granted, the final year statistically wasn't that great, but team-wise, they were still in contention. And they ultimately won Super Bowl 50, so I can't really say a whole lot about that. But ultimately, yeah, Peyton Manning, getting him was the right decision, and it paid off. And now, another one, Tom Brady to the Buccaneers in 2020. Now, this was a team that hadn't made the playoffs in over a decade. They had a solid roster at the time, but they needed an upgrade at quarterback. They got Tom Brady, and ultimately, they go from 7-9 to Super Bowl champs, becoming the first team to play in a Super Bowl played at their home stadium. And Tom Brady added his 7th ring to his collection. So ultimately, it paid off. And they were still contenders the next season. They almost came back against the eventual Super Bowl champ Los Angeles Rams in the divisional round. And then the final year, yeah, they won the division, but that was when Brady started to decline statistically, and that was his least impressive season. But it still was the right signing. I mean, you got a Super Bowl win out of it. You had 2 years of being in contention. If the Bucs could do it over again, they certainly would. So that's another reason it's one of the best free agent signings. So there is also another great one. So you got that. You've also, now we know there's 2 other free agent signings that come to mind that I want to get to in a minute, but there's a few more I feel like deserve a mention. Give me 1 second. I do need a sip of water. Don't worry, I'll be right back. And yeah, we're good. But before we get to the top 2 free agent signings, the 2 biggest steals since 93, a few other ones you got to mention. Mike Vrabel to the Patriots in 01. He was a role player with the Steelers. He went to New England. He perfectly fit in with Belichick's system. He was even a guy you occasionally used for trick plays in the offense. He played a role in the Patriots defeating my Eagles in Super Bowl 39. And now he's the New England Patriots head coach. So he's still a key contributor to the Patriots to this day. And in his first season with New England, they made it to Super Bowl 60. So this is players. But the point I'm getting at is Mike Vrabel, was a great pickup for New England. He fit in perfectly. And then even years later, he's still impactful as a coach. So it not just was he helpful in that first portion of the Patriots dynasty, But a few other honorable mentions, Rich Gannon to the Raiders in 99. Now, he was kind of a journeyman, but he went there in 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. Raiders made the playoffs 3 straight years. He was the league MVP in the 2002 season. And that was the last time the Raiders were actually in contention. So, ultimately, hey, Rich Gannon ultimately was an excellent signing. Just could have played better in that Super Bowl, but you can partially blame that on the Raiders coaching staff for not adjusting the playbook when John Gruden knew all your plays. But that's another story for another time. But speaking of that Raiders team, another free agent signing, Jerry Rice. They already had Tim Brown. They added the steal for Jerry Rice, and he still had a few good years in him with the Raiders. And he played a key role in them getting to Super Bowl 37 too. So let's not forget, Jerry Rice was also another good free agent signing for that Raiders team too. He showed that he still had something left in the tank there as a Raider after all those years of being a 49er. So that was another good free agent signing right there as well. Also, some other ones that come to mind is too, you also got Keaton McCardell for the Jaguars. This is kind of a forgotten one because in those early Jaguar years where they were contenders in the AFC with Coughlin as their coach, Fred Taylor, James Stewart, Mark Brunell as their quarterback, who was the go-to option in the passing game? It was Keenan McCardell, so I got to give him props too because he was a key contributing factor to those Jaguars teams being contenders, upsetting the Broncos in the 96 season and the divisional round. He was there for their first 2 AFC championship game appearances. He was a key factor to that 14-2 season where they had home field in the 99 playoffs. So don't forget about Keaton McCardell, a key factor to those Jaguars teams as well. So those are some of the best right there, but don't forget Dion to the 49ers in 94, the best one-and-done free agent signing in NFL history to me. He was a key factor to that defense. It helped them get over the hump against the Cowboys in the conference championship, which played a role in preventing the Cowboys from winning 4 straight Super Bowls and then limited to just 3 and 4 seasons. So Dion was another great, he was probably the best one-and-done free agency steal of all time. But then there's 2 that stand out. And Arku, you commented one of them. I was saving it for this. You had Reggie White to the Green Bay Packers. Now, this was significant because you're talking about a Green Bay Packers who finally had made the playoffs with Brett Favre in 92. It was their first time in years they were actually a good team. And Brett Favre was still young, so he had his future ahead of him. And then they go and snag the best defensive player in the NFL at the time in Reggie White. And instantly had a huge domino effect on that team. And within a few years, they were in Super Bowl 31, and they destroyed the New England Patriots en route to their 3rd Super Bowl win in franchise history. Now, I think personally Reggie White should have gotten the MVP over Desmond Howard. That was a snub, with all due respect to D. Howard, because Reggie White was the heart and soul of that defense. With all due respect to Leroy Butler, who was an excellent defensive back, but Reggie, who also was a Hall of Famer, but Reggie White was the catalyst to turning that team into contenders. And then there was one more. I'm going to go with this guy because of longevity purposes, and that's, Arku said it, Drew Brees in 06 to the New Orleans Saints. He hit the free agency market for the 05 season. He had that major shoulder injury with the Chargers. Chargers had Phillip Rivers. They thought that would be safer to move on with Rivers. But Drew Brees had other ideas in mind. He wasn't just done yet. Hey, the Chargers didn't want him back, but he found a new home in New Orleans, and he took an irrelevant New Orleans Saints team that was at best a mediocre team market-wise before Hurricane Katrina. Then you had Hurricane Katrina on top of it. And now here comes Drew Brees, the best quarterback in Saints franchise history, one of the best QBs ever to play the game. Immediately makes the Saints relevant. They go to the NFC Championship game, his first season in New Orleans. They end up winning Super Bowl 44, defeating the Indianapolis Colts. Drew Brees is the MVP of that Super Bowl, and he went on to become one of the greatest of all time. So for that right there, he's the greatest free agency steal. Not only because Reggie White, he was great too, but Reggie White's peak mainly with the Packers was 93 to 98. Drew Brees went, 2006 to about 2018 as far as still being a top quality quarterback, and kept the Saints in contention for the majority of those seasons. And he led them to a Super Bowl win. So you got to consider him the greatest free agency steal because with Reggie White, while White was a key impact player, they had made the playoffs. Favre got him to the playoffs in 92, whereas the Saints, Brees went to a dumpster fire in New Orleans at the time that hadn't made the playoffs since 2000 and helped turn them into contenders his first season there. He was that immediate impact player on a terrible team that kept them in contention for over a decade and helped bring a Super Bowl to a team who, outside of his stint with them, has been historically awful to mediocre at best. So I got to consider that the greatest free agent signing in NFL history right there. Drew, because just the sheer impact alone it had. You took the New Orleans Saints, kept them in the mix, made them contenders for years on afterward. I mean, you don't always get that type of luck with a free agent signing. And Drew Brees, he did that for the Saints. He did that there. So I got to consider him the greatest free agent signing in NFL history for that reason right there. So that's a list of some of the best and worst free agent signings. And before we get into a list of some of the top storylines headed into this year's free agency, we do got some news that came from yesterday because it was kind of a shocker to me. Now, we had heard the rumblings. So I'm going to sit there and just put it out right there. So let's see. So you got the Detroit Lions traded David Montgomery to the Houston Texans. I was a little bit shocked. Now, I know that it had been rumored he might be on the outs with the Lions, but you know how I am. You follow me the longest. I don't believe rumors. I wait to see what happens. Ultimately, Montgomery did end up going to the Texans, so now I'm here to talk about it. That was a wow. Agent Warrior, Sonic and Knuckles have been split. Yeah, because that was in my co-host on Everything on the Table, Agent Warrior X's comparison for Montgomery and Gibbs, the Sonic and Knuckles comparison. Well, that is no longer the case. And the Houston Texans now, they get a good running back. You're hoping that he can come in to Houston and do the same thing that he did with the Lions. But here's the question. But we know we've seen this drill before. Teams go and acquire guys, either trade or free agent signing, and ultimately they don't always live up to the hype. Now, we still got to see how Montgomery fits in with Houston. Does he still have that same splash he had in 2019? Now, to be fair, you look at David Montgomery, he is one of 5 players to reach 6,000 yards and 50 rushing touchdowns since 2019. So he's been one of the top running backs in the league alongside Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, and Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey in that stretch. So, and also you can throw Saquon Barkley in there as well. So this looks like a really good trade on paper. But here's the thing. 2 things you got to consider. Number one is, will David Montgomery fit in and duplicate the same success? We know sometimes it doesn't always pan out that way. And B, but for the Houston Texans, while this does give them potentially a great weapon on offense, it doesn't solve the biggest concern. The biggest concern is CJ Stroud. Now, I could kind of understand what they're trying to accomplish here by bringing in Montgomery. They're trying to take some of that pressure off Stroud by giving him a really good running back, hoping that if Montgomery's successful, it could eventually, we know the run game can open up holes in the passing game. That's what the Texans are kind of hoping will happen here, that David Montgomery stays healthy and that he delivers on expectations similar to what he did in Detroit. And maybe that'll help take the pressure off CJ Stroud and make him kind of get him, not necessarily turn him back to his rookie form, but minimize the mistakes and give them a better shot at winning games come playoff time and come clutch games. So there is the potential for this to work out, but we still got to ultimately wait and see. We got to see what happens through free agency and the draft first. So there is a lot of potential here, but for the Lions, this is not good. Unless they can find a running back, unless Jahmyr Gibbs becomes number one and really steps up as a number one, or they find a solid number two, maybe in free agency or the draft. But we still got to wait and see. So initially, this looks like an upgrade for the Texans over the Lions, but how many times have we seen this happen where a team makes a trade? We immediately crown a team a winner and the other team the losers. Remember the Broncos-Seahawks Russell Wilson trade? Who ultimately won that trade? It was actually the Seattle Seahawks who won that trade. They got a bunch of future picks, they rebuilt, and ultimately became Super Bowl champions. And ultimately, the Denver Broncos got rid of Russell Wilson in 2 years. They had to go get Bo Nix to reinvent the wheel and become contenders. So, and at the time, remember, everyone thought that the Broncos were the winners of that Russell Wilson trade. But ultimately, it didn't turn out that way. So, you got to remember, sometimes the trades that we think might be valuable at the time, or sometimes, what we project at the time, who the winners and losers are, didn't ultimately work out that way. Remember the Deshaun Watson trade to the Browns? We all thought the Browns were going to be winners. Well, not all of us, but a lot of us did. Look at how that worked out. Ultimately, the Texans were better off in the long haul without him. So let's not jump ahead and crown the Texans winners just yet. Let's see what they do first. Who's going to be on the team? What's their offensive line going to look like? What are they going to be healthy after training camp going into the season? I mean, there's so many, we still got a lot to see what happens. Who do they keep and lose in free agency? These are all big questions for the Houston Texans. These are all we got to wait and see. So I'm not crowning anybody a winner just yet. But speaking of free agency, let's talk about some of the main storylines real quickly. Kind of do that. Then we'll do some NBA predictions for tonight. And then we're done for this week. And on to episode 50 next week. So some of the main storylines in free agency, the Trey Hendrickson story. Will the Cincinnati Bengals finally pay up to keep the only player on their defense that gives them any chance whatsoever? Or will Trey Hendrickson decide he wants to go somewhere else where he has a better shot at winning, and the Bengals will ultimately be stuck with nothing on defense? That's the one big storyline right there. What about Max Crosby? We know there's been a lot of buzz about him. Will he be gone? Will he have a new home? Will he have a better shot at succeeding elsewhere? There's another big question. The Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Phillips, do they retain him? Does somebody else acquire Jalen Phillips? What happens there? And then also you got the story, the Eagles tight end room. What do they do there? Dallas Goedert, does he come back? Or do they just look for his replacement in the draft? There's another big question. Another question, the Giants, the NFC East rival to the Philadelphia Eagles. John Harbaugh's their head coach. Do guys like Isaiah Likely possibly follow and try to give Jackson Dart a receiver to go through? Do the Ravens retain Tyler Linderbaum with the new coach, or does he potentially go somewhere else? Because the Ravens need to check on that offensive line, because we don't know what's going to... Because the Ravens and Giants both have offensive line concerns they need to look out for, especially the Giants. Now, the question is, do the Giants try to make a steal for Linderbaum, or do the Ravens match? And then you got Malik Willis. Is somebody actually going to pay Malik Willis the big bucks? Someone desperate for a quarterback now. Do they go and pay up, try to bring in Malik Willis? Because he had a good enough performance with the Packers to justify moving up. I mean, I could see them realistically. The Miami Dolphins could be a target for Malik Willis. Possibly. George Pickens is another guy. I think most likely the Cowboys retain him. So there's another one right there. You got Kenneth with the Seattle Seahawks. What pieces do the Seattle Seahawks retain or lose between Kenneth Walker, Boy Maffei, Rashid Shaheed, who was a temporary fill-in piece? Those are some guys that are some key questions about too. Another key question would be a guy like Mike Evans. He hits the free agency market. What do they do with Mike? What happens to Mike Evans? Does he return to Tampa? Do the Bucs move on from him and move with Emeka Ibuka as the number one guy? Does Mike Evans go into a win-now situation, like, say, Buffalo maybe, where he tries to go there and help them win and finally get over the hump and team up with Josh Allen and Joe Brady and Dalvin Cook? No, not Dalvin Cook. James Cook, excuse me. Does he go over there and help them out? Or maybe does he return to Tampa? Or does he go somewhere else in a win-now move? And so there's another key question right there, the Mike Evans saga. What about the Colts? You got Kwity Paye, Daniel Jones hitting the free agency market, Alec Pierce hitting the free agency market. Do you bring these guys back and hope you do better next season and start strong again, but this time actually close the deal? Some interesting questions. Breece Hall's another storyline. Does he just say, you know what? Screw the Jets. I'm going somewhere else. A lot of interesting questions right there. But some of the most interesting team-wise are going to be, I'm going to be biased and say the Eagles because they're my team. I'm looking out for them the most. But also the Seahawks as the defending Super Bowl champs. A lot of their guys are going to be top of the market, like we said, like the Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker, Rashid Shaheed, to name a few. So those are some interesting storylines right there. Nikki, when do you think this free agency still will start happen after the draft? What was that again? I'm just going to read that one more time. When do you think this free agency still will start happen after the draft? I'm like, are you trying to ask me if I think this will be more impactful than the draft, or do you think how much of an impact this will have on the draft? Well, if that's the case, the obvious answer is it'll have a big impact, because for teams that can fill their void in free agency, ultimately that's going to have a big influence on who they draft. See what happened with the greatest free agent steal of all time that I just talked about, Drew Brees to the Saints. Had Drew Brees taken the Dolphins offer, the Saints would have been forced to draft Vince Young instead of Reggie Bush. So free agency has a huge impact on the draft and the direction you move in. Tennessee Titans didn't get a quarterback. They decided to move on from Steve McNair. They ultimately drafted Vince Young. But so sometimes that can be a huge difference. The Denver Broncos ultimately acquiring Peyton Manning led to the decision of the Seattle Seahawks, who initially were in the Peyton sweepstakes, to go for Russell Wilson. And it convinced the Miami Dolphins to go for Ryan Tannehill after they failed to acquire Peyton. So it can be a big factor. So that's a huge factor right there in terms of who you sign. Now, obviously, there's not going to be any superstar quarterbacks getting signed in free agency like a Breeze or a Brady or a Peyton Manning, which obviously those guys aren't in the NFL anymore. But you're not going to have a guy like a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson on the market this year that could potentially be a huge steal for a team. You're not going to have Joe Burrow on the market that could be a huge steal for a mediocre team that could use a quarterback upgrade. That's not happening this year. You're not going to have the Houston Texans make a big trade for Joe Burrow, most likely. So mostly it's going to be the other skill positions like running back, receiver, and even on the defensive side of the ball. Those are going to be the big ones this free agency, and that's going to then influence the draft. So we still got to ultimately wait and see. Now, those are just some of the main storylines I see going into this draft with some of the guys I just named that are hot on the market. So we still got a week beforehand. We still got to wait and see what happens. But I'm looking forward to it. Next week, it's going to happen. We're going to see NFL free agency, which has become the most fun time. This is why March is such a fun time for a sports fan. You got March Madness going on. It's interesting to see the casual fans who always take the bait and take teams based on rankings, not looking at the strength of schedule, looking at their roster, not seeing how that factors into the rankings as well. So it's always interesting to see people with the one big mistake they make with their March Madness pools is they pick teams solely based on rankings, not based on strength of schedule or win-loss record against other top teams. So that'll be interesting to see. We also have to see what happens with the NBA throughout. And we also got to see NFL free agency, man. So it's going to be an interesting time. But real quickly before we go, we're just going to swamp right back to the NBA for just 1 second. So we got that. Yeah, it's next week. So let's take a look at some of the games on tap for tonight. We got Detroit Pistons, Cleveland Cavaliers. Pistons are on a roll. Give me them to keep that momentum going. I'll take them win there. Then we got Hornets versus Mavericks. It's in Charlotte. Hornets have been on a roll lately. They've been taking advantage of easy opponents and winning those easy games. So I'll take the Hornets to keep that momentum going. Wizards and Magic. Give me the Orlando Magic to cream the Wizards. Heat and Nets. Give me the Heat, who are still an all right, solid team with Powell and Bam and company. So I'll take the Heat on that one. Knicks, Raptors. Give me the Knicks. Even though it's in Toronto, and I like what the Raptors can do as a team, but I'm going to go with them there. Sixers, Spurs. Now, I want the Sixers to win. All right, John, best of luck to the Huskies. We don't know about the men's, but I know one thing's for sure. The women's are potential favorites too. So, hey, good luck to both UConn teams. Hopefully one of those two teams can win it for you like they have the past couple years. Because last year was the women's with Paige Beckers winning it in honor of the late Gigi Bryant, daughter of the late Kobe Bryant. And then you had the year before that, UConn won the men's. So we'll see if that good luck can continue for either the women's or the men's teams. And then, but back to this, you got the Timberwolves versus the Grizzlies. Give me the T-Wolves to beat the Grizzlies, especially in Minnesota. I got them to win that one. And then you also got, what else do we got tonight? We got screens going. All right, let's just read it off. Thunder versus Bulls. I got the Thunder beating the Bulls. Pelicans, Lakers, 10:30. In LA, I got the Lakers winning that one. Although the Pelicans have had a few surprising wins lately, so don't be too surprised if the Pels get the upset. And then Suns versus Kings. Give me the Suns to beat the Kings in that one. So those are my predictions for tonight's NBA games. We'll just have to see what happens. Wemby's going to go off against our Sixers. Yeah, I know. You don't even got to tell me about it. I'd be surprised if Wemby only had 19 or 20 points, to be honest. That would actually be a surprise. Do I think Wemby is the best player now? I'll give the slight nod to SGA because SGA had that double MVP season last year, but I say it's pretty close between Wemby and SGA. I'd say maybe a year or two from now, it'll clearly be Wemby, but as of now, I'll give the slight nod to SGA as the best player in the NBA currently. So that's that to answer your question. So to everyone that tuned in, hey, Grega, Little G Griff, Arku, J Play Days, Mitch, thanks for stopping by. Blazed as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And then later tonight, we also got everything on the table tonight with me and Agent Warrior X tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So tune in for that one because we're going to have a fun show for you guys. So with that being said, have a great rest of your day if I don't catch you later. Enjoy, and until next time, peace.